Hi, this is Jack Downs. Welcome to the video version of my Class 2. This is the Wednesday class. I'm afraid I can't be in town, so I'm leaving you this video lesson. There will be a substitute in class for me today. You'll have your TA in class today. You probably are watching this video in class. However, if you missed this in class, or if you want to review it again, there is a link to this video on Moodle. I will send out an email to this effect also. So let's go ahead and start the class. Today what we're going to do is basically go over a few very elementary definitions. For some of you, this may be very easy. If that's the case, great. Don't worry about it. It's just so I'll kind of start at the same beginning point. Also, you'll notice that this first week of class, things are not going to move really fast. But I promise you that beginning next week, the pace will pick up quickly. So it's good to use this time, this little slow period, to get yourself organized. Make sure you get the book. Make sure you begin and get under control these first readings that I give you. Get used to using Moodle. Perhaps, as I'll explain later in this lesson, although it's not required, this might be a good time to download your own copy of Audacity, the audio editor that we use. Make sure you get that on your computer and everything's working great. You don't have to do that. You can use it in the lab. This might also be a good time, although it's not required yet, for you to either on your own computer or in the lab spend a little time with that with Audacity. Become a little more familiar with it. You'll have some requirements for that next week, but any time you spend with Audacity now will make things easier for you later. Now, by the way, if you hear any strange noises like plows going by or other banging noises or so on, I'm doing this recording in the middle of a snowstorm and there's a lot of equipment noises outside the window. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin. Looking at my schedule, and you may hear some papers rustling once in a while here. I think the first thing we should do is how I usually begin a class, which is to look at Moodle and look at the schedule and talk about what was due and what is due coming up. So let's go ahead and go there now. Okay, here we are on Moodle, and this is how I begin most every class. You'll see that I'm in the middle page. Mine may look a little bit different than yours, than your view, but it should be relatively similar. And as usual, we want to first go to the daily schedule. When I go to the daily schedule, I see that for today, Wednesday the 30th, I'll make that even bigger. There we go. Wednesday the 30th, the topic is the audio-video world. That is true. What was due today? Audio-video I like. Now remember, that was a file you should have emailed to me, and you should hand this in class. If it wasn't already collected, it'll be collected at the end of class, or you could pause this video now and collect it now. You're going to hand this in to the substitute for me. So if something happened and you didn't get that finished yet, please do finish it. Please still do email it to me. Please still do print the email. I know that sounds a little silly, but it helps me to keep track of them if I actually have that printed and handed in. And either leave it on my door or just bring it to next class. There was also the Moodle welcome response, which was due today, which was just your introduction to you in the forum here on Moodle. So you should have received instructions about that. It is not graded, but I encourage you to do it. If you haven't done it, please go do it soon. What is due next class? Well, it says to bring your drive and your headphones daily. Sorry, your thumb drive and your headphones. And that's going to be a standing rule for a long time. Please just bring your drive and your headphones all the time. Also, it says what's due next class is Podcast Solutions, Chapter 1, Reading Handout Given in Class. In fact, I gave it to you the first class. What if you missed the first class? What if you're just signing up now? Don't worry about it. Your TA, Asia, has extra copies of this, so you can get that from her. So please do that reading. Now, I hope you read it all thoroughly and enjoy it. However, are you going to be quizzed on this? Yes, you are. Well, what am I going to ask you? Whenever I give you readings like this, or readings in a regular textbook, then what I do is, if you recall, I show you here in the schedule what are the key questions I want you to know about. And if we look a little further down, we'll just move down here for now. Here's the reading guidance on Podcast Solutions Chapter 1. And here are the questions I would want you to know the answers to for the upcoming quiz. And there is a quiz if you look ahead in the schedule, or maybe we will in just a minute. So that reading was due. And by the way, if we look ahead to tomorrow's class, and what's going to be due as we move forward more fully, you'll see this Journalism Next reading is going to be due as over the weekend. I will have already given you that reading also, so you could potentially get ahead on it if you wish. And guess what? There's reading guidance on that one here in the schedule also, what things I think you should know. So for next class, roughly do this first reading, or maybe you've already done it. I'm going to review some things that are mentioned in there. And then for the following class, like for Monday's class, you have this next reading here. Again, if you didn't get it, if you lost it, if you weren't here, Asia has extra copies. So that's the schedule pretty much. Don't be afraid to look further ahead. The questions that on these readings will be on a quiz, which is going to be coming up on a week from today, Wednesday the 6th. And I even tell you before that what the quiz is, and I'll be back into class to remind you too what's going to be on there. So that is the whole schedule. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the topic today. So I asked you in the assignment that was due today, this audio video I like, to find for me a audio podcast probably, or piece of audio that you really liked, that you thought was the kind of thing you'd like to do, that was perhaps on a topic and that you liked, and something that was well done, something you admired, and then just do the same thing for a piece of video, probably a video podcast, but didn't have to be. These could be things with journalistic elements and or public relations elements. It was fine for me either way. And I really look forward to looking at those. Typically in this class today, I would show some of those, but of course I don't have them yet when I'm making this video. So we'll do that another time. But I really look forward to seeing all the kinds of audio and video that you are looking at and listening to, and also learning new pieces of audio video as we go along too. So in addition, one of the goals here is for you to look a little more critically at audio and video that's all around you. And it is all around you. You are swimming in a sea of audio and video, so much so that you probably take it all for granted. But there definitely was a time on the internet when audio and video was a very rare thing, and even a time when it was pretty much non-existent. So I would like you to try to step back in your daily lives in the audio and video that you consume and really think about, how am I consuming it? What is the structure of this audio and video? What is it that I like about it? Can I imagine doing this? What are the different elements that are making it up, that are critical to the way it was put together? So try to look at it a little more critically and to think about it a little more technically, which will be easier as we go along and you learn more and more of the tools that were used to make these things that you consume. So and one of the things about swimming in the sea of audio and video that you take for granted is you may not realize that today it is easier than ever to create and publish audio and video. With so many people publishing so much audio and video, from everything from giant media corporations down through to, a middle school kid in her bedroom, strumming on a guitar or posting a fashion or makeup blog or who knows what. There's such a wide range of stuff. It can all be a little bit confusing, and all the methods of delivery of these things have all been kind of pushed together. But let's think about how it all started. Back in the early days of the internet, and we're talking about probably pre the year 2000 at this point. What we had was, if you had a piece of in this case, it wouldn't be video because the internet was way too slow for video. But let's imagine you had a piece of audio. You had a piece of audio, and you wanted to show it to people, to get people to listen to it, to give it to your friends, to maybe even kind of build an audience. You really only had one choice, and that was to have these listeners download the audio manually from the internet to their computers via device. And that's the simple definition of download. And here I'm putting it on the screen for you. And I think you should write this down. I think you should know this definition. These definitions that I have here on this page, which I'll go through as we go along here, are definitely going to be on a future quiz, with this first quiz. So imagine you are going to do your, at this point, they weren't even called podcasts. The word didn't exist. But you're going to do what later we would call a podcast. And you're going to, every week, for instance, make a new episode. How are you going to get people to listen to it? How would they know that it was ready? You had to probably send out emails to everybody, and they had to manually go to a place and download the file. And when they downloaded it, it took a long time just for a short piece of audio to download. So they just waited and waited and waited, and finally got there to their computer, maybe an early device. At that point, there weren't even the handheld devices, but not too long after that there were, in which they could then finally, when they got it, listen to it. But so imagine how hard that made it to build an audience. All these people had to do all this work to get that piece of media, and only then could they to listen to it. And then when the next one was ready, they had to either know it was there or think to go get it or look for the email, and eventually then take all that work again. So that was a very slow way to go about it. But the download button, the download idea, is still a valuable one, and it's still around. In fact, let's go to a podcatcher, a podcast kind of catalog. Podbeam is the one that is a very popular one now. Of course, not as big as, for instance, iTunes or so on, which is a little harder to show you. But there's many others. All these podcast cataloging, organizing. These also are companies that will help you create podcasts and so on, and get them into all these catalogs, and Podbean is one. So Podbean, in addition to cataloging and so on, is here for people to go listen to or find, explore podcasts. And let's say I want to go to a music podcast. And as it turns out, none of these are that interested in me. What I want to find is Celtic music. So let's go ahead and just do a search for Celtic. Okay, and here's an Irish and Celtic music podcast. Sounds interesting. And as I go and look at this, I see I have a download button. The download button still exists everywhere around us. We kind of take it for granted, but that was how things started. We'll move on to a little bit. Actually, listen to this in just a minute. But let's continue along with this idea of this little bit of history. So we're talking about pre-year 2000, download was the only option. However, about the year 2000, it still wasn't called podcast until about 2004, 2005. But the podcasting idea began to be built. The idea of a podcast is it's audio or video file that is downloaded from the internet automatically via subscription by way of an RSS feed. So it's this technology called RSS. And here's a definition for that. People do vary, and some of it's lost in the history of the internet as far as what that really stands for. But most people agree that there's some difference of opinion, but most people agree it stands for really simple syndication. And it uses a computer code called XML. You know, it's not a coincidence that that's not far from HTML that we use for the web. And also XML is used for a lot of software writing, for a lot of construction of naming of content. Actually, it's like a markup kind of language. A computer code called XML to describe the content, the podcast, allowing it to be downloaded to listeners, later viewers, in the case of video, in an automated way. So RSS made podcasts possible. So what's the idea of a podcast? What's special about a podcast? Well, to be a podcast, it isn't just a piece of audio or video. It's a recurring. So it's going to be made on a regular and predictable schedule. Good. Also, the key points here is that after you subscribe to it, which only takes one click, and in the case of my Irish music podcast, I could follow it. I essentially subscribe to it. So I can subscribe to it. I can hook my player or computer up to it so that it is downloaded from the internet automatically. And that is the key thing here. there's I don't have to go every week or month or something and find it and download it manually. It comes automatically. That it really changes the world of online media for us. That it made it so much easier to get an audience of people who are interested in your content. It really brought about a boom in first audio podcasting and then video also. It just opened up that world. And it did it in some other ways too. It also did it in a kind of media for which there are no gatekeepers or no authorities. You can do anything you want on a podcast. You can say anything you want on a podcast. You can, yeah, sure, if you violate certain rules, maybe some podcatchers won't carry you, but in general, it really is a wide open field. There's nobody telling you, sorry, you can't publish that because we own the press. Right? We own the press, and so you can't have your own newspaper or magazine or something. No, it's wide open for you. You can gather an audience very easily. It puts you on a nearly level playing field with major media organizations. And the file, because it's downloaded automatically, is ready when the listener and or viewer wants to consume it. It's right there. Remember, so a podcast implies a series, a sequence, a regular, recurring, predictable one. You can get it via subscription. You don't need, and remember, you don't need an iPod, those are going out anyway, or an iPhone for that matter, to get podcasts. You can get them on all kinds of different devices and on computers and so on too. At the same time, we're talking about 2005 at this point now, when podcasts really start catching on. The internet was going faster. There was a lot of faster connections everywhere. The speed of the internet increased, technology improved, and we are moving quickly into the time when video becomes more common, and we also start to get into streaming. So here we go into streaming, which is really how many of you consume a lot of the audio and video that you do now. Streaming media, web streaming, multimedia that is constantly presented to the provider and received by the listener, viewer, via a player. So there's no single big file that's downloaded, like in the download idea, or even downloaded like in the podcast idea. Even though the nice thing about the podcast is it happens sort of like when you don't have to be there and wait for it to download. In streaming, the file is presented to your player, audio or video, like on YouTube for video. Or okay, sorry, brief pause there. Had to restart. So streaming, the idea that the file is constantly presented by the provider and received by the listener, viewer via player. But unlike download, where a single big file ends up on your computer and you just watch it and then it stays there, your computer or any other device, there is no big file that just stays on your computer. It's just the stuff stays out there on the server, waiting for it to be streamed again. So streaming is all around us, but it's only been made possible by the fact we had, first of all, that we had podcasting to begin with, and also that now we have the kind of speeds that can handle it. Not only audio streaming, but now video streaming too, of course. And finally, it's sort of part of this trend, of this direction we've been going, and more we have cloud computing. More and more we do have files that stay, and this is all kinds of things like data, music, files download multiple devices, all kinds of software and so on, that stay in the cloud, as we say. That just means on a server. Server just means a computer that's hooked to the internet. So the files stay there, and we only get them when we want them, and we actually don't get them at all. They actually stay there, and we only have access to them on the servers. And iCloud or Google Docs and so many other, all the music services that have streaming now, that's really cloud computing. So that's been the progression we've gone on. Those are some easy definitions. And now I just want to back up for just a moment and talk about podcasting and some trends. But perhaps first we'll talk about the kinds of audio and video you might do in this class, the kinds of audio and video that interns from this class are doing, and some things that you might think of to help you in your media work that you do, NPR work that you're doing in the future. So, I was just gonna say briefly, yes. So I mentioned this idea of a podcatcher, Podbean being one of them, and yes. Also, I wanted to say the idea that the that the download button is all around us with the subscribing button, which is all around now at the same time as with the streaming button, which is what this is. This is the streaming button, and I can go ahead and, although I can subscribe to this, though I can download this, I can just play it right here. And let's play it.
The Irish and Celtic Music Podcast Show number 393, Celtic Music Instrumental Study Aid.
I like this file, this show, because they do this occasional study aid files. So it's just nice instrumental music you could use to study to. So you want some music to study to? Why don't you check this one out? But I'm not going to use it as a soundtrack for this lesson, I'm afraid, because we have more things to do. Okay, so I wanted to show you that. Now I want to show you the idea of some stuff that you could do that people are doing around you and so on. That's maybe like some of the things maybe you sent me in this little assignment you've just done. Hey, first of all, so much of the most consumed audio and video in local media around us and in local PR around us is really just little slices of life. So for instance, here is something that an intern did, not one of our interns, but it's still an intern, did at a local radio station. The idea of just following it, going up, walk with a bunch of international students who are going on a hike in the Adirondacks. So I'll just play a little bit of this. Let's see if you can listen to it okay. I'm going to turn it up.
This is news from North Country Public Radio.
Not too long ago, on a kind of a cool and cloudy day, our intern Sarah Harris climbed Mount Marcy. It was her first Adirondack peak, but it was even more of an adventure for the motley crew of global citizens she hiked with. She sent us this audio postcard from their adventure.
It's a Saturday morning in late June. I'm hiking Mount Marcy in interesting company, 4 St. Lawrence University international students. Together, we hail from all corners of the globe, 2 from Kenya, 1 from Zimbabwe, 1 from the Maldives, and me, a native Texan with New England roots. As we make our way to the trailhead, Tanda tells us about a legend born on Zimbabwe's tallest mountain.
So there's like a superstition where like if you say anything negative climbing the mountain, you disappear or you turn into an insect. So I remember like being 10 years old and climbing and like not wanting to say anything and not wanting to point at anything.
So maybe we should make a rule that we can't say anything negative, otherwise we turn into an insect.
Okay, and it goes on for some time. Imagine just grabbing an audio recorder and just going out and do a slice of life thing with people. It's sort of like a mini news story, an easy one to do. And actually, this will be an option for an extra credit project, not on a hike necessarily, but there's all kinds of other things you could do in the future. And some students do this as extra credit. But it's also commonly, this sort of piece gets on the radio too, and it's sort of gets you into media. What else? Well, some of the most commonly, some actually the highest clicked on videos on local news sites are actually just raw little pieces of video. I remember one a few years ago, just an intern just grabbed a camcorder and just shot a fire just for 5 minutes of fire. You know, the trucks, the water, them cutting a hole in the roof and so on. It wasn't necessary to have any narration. They got it up immediately. It was just put up as raw video. People just wanted to watch the firefighters work. And that's an easy example. Something that requires a little more production is some of these videos. Here's a list of videos at the Press Republican site. I mentioned them because things like going to a parade, going to a Christmas play, going to some students that are preparing for open mic night, doing a preschool, they're singing some song, so on. So these little slice of life videos, many of these are videos that were done by students who finished this class and then did internships at the Press Republican, the local daily newspaper, in which they did videos that would go along with stories, or sometimes they actually wrote stories and took pictures too, and those appeared in the paper, and the videos went online with them. So it's an internship which is directly connected to this class and the things you learn here. But you're making the kinds of small produced videos that are very valuable, get a lot of traffic, and connect you with the local media. So one example would be this story from this story was written by, and then a video was produced by two students from this class back a few years ago. There was a volleyball competition group was coming through Plattsburgh. This was a summer internship in this case. So they went out and just shot some video, interviewed some of the players and the coaches and stuff about it, and created a little video. Now, unfortunately, the only access I have to the video right now is on the newspaper website, and sometimes the resolution isn't that good. I'll play a tiny bit for you, but just so you know, the copies that they kept of this, which I don't have right now, are really were better quality.
Greg Leninger. I'm the EVP Tour National Tour Director, and today we have our pro event going on. We have our men's pro, women's pro, and we also have our amateur divisions.
It goes. Sorry, another little restart there. Okay, so one reason to show you this is that I want you to keep in the back of your mind the idea of this internship. We call it the point-blank internship. The idea of doing audio and video, really mostly video, for the local newspaper, getting that published, maybe getting some stories and photographs published at the same time. So it's a great way to do an internship that can really help you in your career. In fact, this work right here helped both of these guys getting jobs in the future after graduation. They did this in a summer internship. All right, let's continue along here. By the way, I will give you links on Moodle to all these different things I'm going to, so you can look at these links yourself later if you wish, for perhaps better quality and so on too. Something else you'll find in Moodle that I wanted to mention to you under the video resources is way down here someplace. Where is it? Let me find it. Wrong place. Other class resources. And here it is. YouTube. Review projects from past students. So some more video that students in this class have done. In fact, quite a lot of it. Lots of video that students in this class have done. You can go back and look at some of the good projects, special projects, very well done projects, and some of the kinds of work that you will be doing. This YouTube channel, which is linked from the Moodle site, has all that stuff in it. Okay, and while I'm here, I might as well mention something else that's here, is the idea of installing Audacity, and then installing the lame is MP3 encoder, which is part of Audacity. There are links here to this idea. Actually, the best link is right here. Audacity download and then lame encoder. Then there's videos of doing them also, which are down below. So I suggested that maybe this would be a good thing for you to do in this little slow period here. So you get perhaps your own copy of Audacity, and then you could perhaps get some practice with it a little bit ahead of time. Not required at this time, but let me just show you the program briefly while we're here. You will probably have access to an icon on your desktop. I am here in my start menu, and you'll see the icon looks like a little blue headphones with a yellow and orange squiggly thing in the middle. That's what Audacity looks like. We'll open up Audacity. Audacity opens up usually with this splash screen, which includes the links to the manual and quick help and so on. Don't worry, you can get to all those things later on as you go, so you can just X this out if you wish. I'm going to make mine full screen. So this is what Audacity looks like. Spending a little time with it would be really useful. Going to the help in the manual can be useful too. In the manual, there are some tutorials that you can go through. Let me suggest you spend some time and look around in this program. Do you want an audio file to use in the program too? Well, why don't you go ahead and go. I'm going to go back up a ways on our Moodle page to resource files for assignments and projects. And in here, even in this file handling for this first exercise, although you don't have to do this exercise, there's a WAV file. This is an audio file that you can use. This Audacity is some music files you can use, and a voice file you can use. You can take those files, download them, with a right-click, save link as, depending on what browser you're using, onto your drive, and use those to practice in Audacity. There'll be assignments with these later on as we go. And one of the last things I wanted to tell you, as I know I kind of jump around here and being a little disjointed, is getting back to the idea of the kinds of media that you might create and the focus of this class. Some people, maybe 5 or 6 years ago in a class like this, or even 3 or 4 years ago, might have asked, why do you spend so much time on audio? Well, yes, you need to learn audio before video, and audio is a part of video. And there was a time a few years ago when really the focus was video. And it's true, video is very important, and you'll do a lot of video work, perhaps the majority of this class. But the one reason to stick with audio is audio has become such a huge part of the business, such a strong part of the industry over the last few years. Audio podcasting in particular is everywhere. There are so many podcasts. I think that one of the real big boom in the last few years with audio podcasting started with things like Serial, which was both a public radio show but became an enormous podcast, and just sort of kicked off so much podcasting. This is in the category of that true crime podcasting, real investigations of things, real journalism. At the same time, there were podcasts like Night Vale, which was one of my favorites from years ago. Spooky, supernatural, bizarre, so many incredibly creative things that really harken back to the old days of radio and the idea of real drama. In this case, just bizarre supernatural drama that really became enormous. Those were from years ago, and they're still going strong, these things. There are so many podcasts now. We look at them at the iTunes most downloaded podcasts for last year, or this is the most downloaded overall. Many of them are radio shows, which are perhaps sometimes more popular in podcasts than they are on the radio now. All the TED Talks, for instance, and so many music shows and comedy shows and news shows and Oprah and on and on. It becomes enormous. There's so many podcasts. In fact, in some ways, I'd say the podcasting wave has gotten so enormous, audio podcasting wave, which many of which have video options now too, that maybe it's gotten a little bit too big. A couple of years ago, I would recommend it. Any student get into any podcast that you can, just make podcasts. And you certainly should still do that and have to practice doing it. But there seems to be maybe a bit more podcasts than we care to have time to listen to now out there. So, for instance, that kind of idea inspired what I thought was a hilarious story that came out from The Onion. I hope you know The Onion is fake news, intentionally funny fake news. So this is not a real story, but I love this story that came out a while back, essentially saying that there's a crisis. According to a report out today, 250 million Americans are still scrambling to find someone to appear in their podcast this week. The idea of an empty chair and a microphone with nobody in front of it. Just thought that was a funny idea, that we have so many podcasts now, we all have to appear on each other's podcasts. There's something to that, I guess. Okay, let me wrap things up in just a moment. And finally, just to wrap things up, a reminder to do your reading. You had the Podcast Solutions Chapter 1 handout. You had the Journalism Next Chapter 7 handout. You don't have any reading yet in the textbook. However, if you haven't gotten the textbook yet, please get it, because you'll have reading in that soon. Otherwise, if you have questions or problems, you can certainly email me, and I'll try to get back to you soon, though I am out of town and have some other things going on. Finally, please talk to your TA, to Asia. If you have any questions or problems or need handouts or anything, she can help you out. And we'll get things straightened out hopefully on Friday, when I expect to be back in class, and then through early next week when the class will pick up speed, and you'll have plenty of time to get everything done then also. Do keep an eye on your email. If there's any change in my schedule or in Friday's class, I'll let you know, but otherwise expect it to be there. Have a good day. Catch you later.